Hi, everyone. Hello. I'm Haley Tone from the class of 2007. Welcome to Opening Doors, Creating Spaces, Making Art Accessible. I have the honor of introducing this panel as a proud member of the We Lead Advisory Board. Yvonne was wearing our t-shirt this morning, which was so perfect. As you've already heard, We Lead is the Williams Women's Philanthropy Initiative. It stands for Women's Equity in Leadership, even though in 2018 when we started it, we called it Mods Broads. But we have a more formal name now, We Lead, and we're working to achieve gender parity in leadership philanthropy at Williams by 2025. So we have several more years to achieve this significant goal. And events like this are so crucial to cultivating our love for Williams, and I'm so grateful for this weekend. It's really just been incredible so far. You can learn more about We Lead on your bookmark. There's a QR code that you can scan. And I'm so grateful to be here. As an art history major also, I'm very excited to learn from this panel of incredible women that we have today. I'll introduce them now. Rachel Watts, class of 1997. Mika G. Conway, who's a Master's of Art in 1998. And Stephanie Dockery, my fellow 2007. Yeah. We call her Steph Doc. So even saying her full name was hard for me. And our moderator, WICMA Director Pam Franks. So welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Pam. Thank you, Williams, for inviting me to be here with you today. We're just going to do quick introductions, each of us self-introducing kind of what we do and why we do it, who we are, before we get into the panel discussion. So let's see. My name's Mika G. Conway. I'm the Chief Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging Officer and Equal Employment Opportunity Director at the National Gallery of Art in Washington. I have to say this, the views I express here today are mine. They do not necessarily represent those of the National Gallery or the US government. Definitely not the latter. I am a 1998 graduate of the Williams College Graduate Program in the History of Art. And in addition to that training as an art historian, I'm also an attorney. And I've worked in museums in various capacities, from intern to curator to assistant director to, before this gig I have now, I was the associate general counsel at the Getty Trust. I worked at small artist foundations, I worked at big museums, medium-sized museums. And I would like to tell this story of who I am and why I do what I do through the change that's underway at the National Gallery of Art, which opened in 1941, a novel public-private partnership that was the brainchild of the financier and art collector turned Secretary of the Treasury, Andrew Mellon, and President Franklin D. Roosevelt. Mellon gave the American people his art collection and the money to build our first building, the big neoclassical building on the National Mall. And in exchange, Congress said they would fund our operations in perpetuity. And in late 2018, Kay Feldman, then director of the Minneapolis Institute of Arts, became only the National Gallery's fifth director, in its history, and the first woman to hold that post. And her mandate from the board of trustees that hired her is, in short, to put the National back in the National Gallery of Art. And under her leadership, we've articulated our first vision statement, which is of the nation and for all the people, and we've restated our mission in terms that expressly center people and national service. We serve the nation by welcoming all people to explore and experience art, creativity, and our shared humanity. And I joined in September 2020, to be part of this realization of this new vision. And as you can imagine, the National Gallery of Art, along with many other art museums, has work to do. The sort of traditional view of museums as neutral, arbiters of truth and of quality, as opposed to institutions that are just like any other institutions, just as likely to reflect and perpetuate existing structural inequalities. That view of museums has been in question for a long time, but the events of the past few years, including the murder of George Floyd, the hashtag #MeToo movement, the raising of widespread social consciousness around systemic racism and sexism has brought this debate from the theoretical to the practical, and many museums, mine included, are just starting to grapple with what needs to change at an institutional level, and then how to really operationalize those changes. And so I want to share a few key facts to put these efforts in context. So what does it mean to serve the nation? And how has that nation changed since the National Gallery's founding? And one way, obviously, is in its demographic makeup. This is a comparison of the 1940 and 2020 census data showing how the share of the population that identifies as non-white or not white alone is growing. And by 2045, that share is projected to exceed 50%. So we're much more heterogeneous than we were in 1940, and that rate of change is accelerating. And then here's a look at how the art museum field is doing. On the far left, I've simplified the 2020 census data just into white and BIPOC, or Black, Indigenous, people of color, in order to compare it to the latest data available about the demographics of the art museum field, staffs nationwide, which comes from a 2022 study sponsored by the Mellon Foundation. And you'll see in the middle chart that the art museum field is, in the aggregate, slightly whiter, 64% compared to 60%, than the country overall. And then when you look closely, or you look just at what the study authors call the intellectual leadership positions, by which they mean the curatorial, conservation, education, senior leadership, those people really making key programmatic decisions, that the disparity gets even bigger, with 73% of those positions being held by people who identify as white. And if we look even closely, or even more specifically, at the National Gallery and that same slice of staff, curatorial, conservation, education, senior leadership, you see this gap is even more pronounced, standing currently at 83% white and 17% people of color. And our audience looks not dissimilar. In 2022, are 3/4 of our visitors identified as white. So we can do a much better job of building a staff and attracting an audience that better reflects the nation and the full diversity of the taxpayers who fund our operations and to whom the collection belongs. And indeed, we must do a better job or we will just become irrelevant. And speaking of our collection, just one last fact, here's another indication of the work that we have to do. The best available information we have shows that of the more than 150,000 works in our collection, 98% of them are by white artists, and 92% of them are by male artists. So now, we're never gonna, not in my lifetime, gonna have a collection that's fully representative, and we also only collect European and American art. Basically, we don't have a collection of Asian art, we don't have a collection of African art, probably we never will. But we can do better going forward, and we must find ways to include other voices and diversify the stories that we tell and make that collection more vital and relevant to everyone. And then I will close with our current strategic priorities, which relate nicely to the subject of our panel, and working to help our National Museum, your National Museum, better reflect and be relevant to a changing nation, and center the needs of and expand our audiences is why I do what I do, and I look forward to expanding on these ideas and goals in our discussion. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Stephanie Dockery and I'm a proud member of the class of 2007. I'm feeling, thank you, so much inspiration from this morning's sessions, and it's incredible to be here with all of you. I'm just so honored to be with my people in the Purple Valley. So I was a JA and a housing coordinator and an English and art history major when I was here, and a lot of my time in the Purple Valley was spent really exploring my interests and having the space to figure out what I love and realizing that I love the arts, even if I didn't know how to make that a thing. I also discovered very much what I didn't want to do. I had an internship at the Old British Art Center where I realized I did not want to be a museum curator. And I got a fellowship to teach in English in Chile, and I realized, okay, teaching and professorship, while I love that and I admire that of those who I've experienced it with, it's not for me. So I want to say particularly if there are any students and any current Williams graduates, it's hard to realize that you might not have it figured out, but that's also okay. So many of us didn't have it figured out when we were graduating, I got my job at the Williams Club, where I worked right out after graduating, maybe a few days before our graduation. So, it will work out. The workforce needs you, and please don't stress. You're smart and brilliant. They'd be lucky to have you. But when in that year, my first year in New York, I'll just advance a little bit, a little background. When I was in New York for my first year, I worked at the Williams Club and I realized, okay, I definitely want to be in the arts. There was an impending recession coming on. Bear Stearns had just fallen, and so even though it hadn't quite happened, I could see the writing on the wall. So of course I chose a job at the arts right at the time when arts were getting defunded. So I decided to get a master's in art business at Sotheby's Institute of Art in Singapore. At the time, I really identified Asian art as a gap in my knowledge, but also at that time, everyone was talking about Asia being the new frontier for global business, and I wanted to be in on that. I was there for 2 years, came back and worked at the Arts and Business Council of New York, and that's where I really left just the visual arts, and I was working to support arts organizations of all types, dance, theater, music, and really understanding that the field is an ecosystem and there's so many transferable skills within it. It's not just about the visual arts and not just about, especially spending time with Sotheby's, like precious art for rare collectors. But I was really inspired to make the arts more accessible, particularly to New Yorkers while I was working under Americans for the Arts, which is a large national arts advocacy organization that was instrumental in getting the NEA founded. From there, I went to Lincoln Center, where I ran corporate sponsorship and wanted to sharpen my fundraising skills, which is really critical for anyone who's ever worked at a nonprofit with a nonprofit on a board. You know that that's the lifeblood of keeping these institutions whole and open. And it was also another time to learn how to just raise money for the performing arts, for visual arts, and keeping such a door to New York City accessible for people of all kinds. And now I am a program officer at Bloomberg Philanthropies, where I help to make the arts more accessible by funding arts organizations, artists, and cities to do public art programs. So I'll just go through some of those very quickly. We have worked in 11 different cities, and here are some of our projects. This map shows everywhere we've worked. We're in our third round of our Public Art Challenge. So we give $1 million grants to cities to do temporary public art projects that address a significant civic issue in their community. So mayors partner with artists and nonprofits, like a really unusual combination. You don't hear about government working with artists so much. And so worked in Anchorage on a climate change project that transformed a dilapidated building, saved it from becoming yet another covered parking lot in Anchorage, and turned it into a think tank for designers and artists and engineers to work with residents and take those conversations and workshops and turn them into public art throughout the community. And during COVID, there were a lot of social distancing spaces and facades of businesses that became desirable for outdoor eating, particularly in an increasing vacant downtown. This is a project at the port to show how fragile the infrastructure is, particularly the port, which serves all of the state. Some of the murals outdoors. This piece shows the increasing fire and the spruce bark beetles, which are causing massive deforestation in Anchorage due to climate change. Some of the outdoor mural facades. Our project in Camden transformed 6 illegal dumping spaces into venues for public art. So contractors come off the highway. Camden is often spoken so terribly about in the media, and their SEO shows that, murder rates are some of the highest in the country. And so they wanted to change the perception of their city and show that this is a valuable place to live and this place matters. And so they reclaimed these spaces for the neighborhood and turned them into these large-scale places for public art where people could enjoy and picnic and, do yoga workshops. And they actually ended up getting massive grants from Biden's infrastructure bill, as well as city, state, and local funding to continue transforming these illegal dumping spaces. This is our project in Coral Springs, Parkland. We worked with both cities at the year mark of the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas shooting to provide healing after gun violence. And the city of Parkland had just been voted one of the safest cities in America. And so people were not feeling safe with their neighbors. So bringing people together, providing healing, and providing spaces for them to talk about the tragedy began with a healing temple, which 1,000 people came out to build with the artist, and then ended in that burn 5 months later. And here's the temple before it was burned. And these participatory projects just brought people together in a really uncommon way that brought them together with the community and provided another type of healing. Of the build photos. Our Peace and Love billboard was at the opening of an intersection coming out into the city of Coral Springs. And this is a 72-hour walk. And then the city of Jackson did a food equity project after the CDC listed Mississippi as the #1 obese state in the country. And so they recognize that it's not bad choices people are making, but rather bad options, largely stemming from segregation and slavery. And so they took matters into their own hands, not just to highlight food access issues, but to combat them, and created learning gardens with an elementary school, the first organic urban farm within a 100-mile radius, and several murals throughout the city during social distancing. And then I just want to end with our project in Tulsa, which worked with the city of Tulsa for 4 years in advance of what we're all aware of, the Black Wall Street Massacre, where a white mob killed a really productive Black community in 1921 and razed the neighborhood, leaving 10,000 people homeless overnight, killing thousands of people. And this project, steered by the city and the artist Rick Lowe and a local foundation, allowed artists of Tulsa to really tell their story, tell the story of Greenwood and North Tulsa, as many people have moved out of Greenwood. And there was a series of historical tours and events and performances. Here's a parade that celebrated the legacy of Greenwood, Sarah Maud's piece, that shows reconciliation and healing and symbolizes the firebombing. And so we brought people together through that basically festival to tell a history, but also to help bring investment back into the community of Greenwood. So I think I'll end there and send it to Rachel. Thank you.
Good. Is it still morning? Morning, everyone. My name is Rachel Watts. I graduated from Williams in '97. I was originally class of '96. And I am the executive director of Arts Connection, which is a New York City-based arts and education organization. I am the first woman and the first person of color to be leading Arts Connection, which is 45 years old. And I am among many in my field who look like me, who are now executive directors recently in the year 2020. So I will share a little bit of statistics, but I wanted to share something that was resonated for me from this morning. For those of you who were in Yvonne's talk this morning, she talked about the power of the liberal arts, and it clicked for me. It has arts in the title. And everything that I do is about making sure there's arts in education, in people's education, because she talked about being able to make connections, to think critically, to problem solve, and that liberal arts education really prepared her for the world of work that she's doing. So that's really what I do. So I'm going to share a little bit more about the organization. So in 1979, when there was a fiscal crisis in New York City, like is the pattern and continues to be the pattern, arts teachers were being taken out of schools as a way to save money for the school system. So Arts Connection was one of a handful of organizations that was created out of public funds to put artists in public schools. So one, it was giving artists work, but it was also putting the arts back into the public school system. And we now work with young people and the educators who work with them to really think about how to inspire them to think about their future and to navigate their future. So we're not necessarily making artists, but we're looking at where the arts are helping build you into a fully formed human being so that you can be successful in life. We work in 3 ways in New York City public schools across the city, all 5 boroughs, K through 12, pre-K through 12, and in all art forms. In addition, we work with young people outside of schools, mostly teenagers who come to us. And again, it's about navigating the opportunities that there may be in creative industries. So a lot of the students in the public school system are children of immigrants, and the concept of doing a career in the arts is like, what, you know? So helping them be able to advocate for themselves and to say, listen, I can build a career that is sustainable in the arts, and that's the kind of work we do with young people outside of school. And then with adults who work with young people in different capacities, whether it's in school or community serving agencies or incarcerated young people, really thinking about where the arts can help with their programs. This is old information, 2014, but it's the most recent I could find in terms of statistics and think 1979, the organization started, and in 2014, almost a third of the New York City public schools did not have at least one art teacher. No art teacher, no music teacher, no theater teacher, no dance teacher. And it was worse in neighborhoods that were considered poor neighborhoods. So South Bronx, Central Brooklyn, we're looking at 42% no arts teacher in the school system, in their school. A lot of focus on test prep and math and English, barely even social studies in the curriculum. And then this is just a statistic of the census of the country on the left and the census of New York City on the right, I'm sorry, I'm mixing that up, sorry. The census of New York City is on the right, which shows that 32% of the population of New York City identifies as white, but within cultural institutions, which is a little bit more, it's similar to what Mika had said earlier, within cultural institutions, it's a much larger percentage white. And then when you get into who are the leaders of boards and executives, it's even a little bit higher, 70 and 68%. Whereas in New York City, the arts organizations are more female, and in education, when you really look at education, there's much more female. So when you think of a 45-year-old organization and many more in the field now, all still being run by men, which is a little hard to see, and you can't find that data, but anecdotally, within those, it's also male heavy in terms of who is leading the organizations. But who's doing the work? And just to share a little bit, since I've been at Arts Connection a long time, but moving into this role, and it fits in with this idea of access that we continue to think about, is to really look at our work in terms of impact and to deepen that impact, which means finding ways to work more and longer with young people, and then to harness our knowledge. 45 years of doing this, there are now over 400 organizations that do work in the New York City public school system, in some way around the arts. So when we started, places like Ailey or Lincoln Center didn't have education departments, right? So Arts Connection is one of the few organizations that only focuses on education, is not a department in a performing institution. So we really have focused on arts education, and we want to harness that to advocate for the field and advocate for the work that we do in the future. And then one of the things I think is really important is to shift to what I like to say, and there are a few others to say, is something that is community-led. So that I replaced someone who had been in the position for 34 years. I don't plan to be in this position for 34 years. I plan to find the person who's going to replace me, who comes through the work that we do. and that's important to do that. So looking at shared leadership models and eventually just thinking about different ways the organization could be run so that it's more community-led and more folks in the community are making decisions about what our work should look like. I just want to share, this is the first time in a very long time that I'm missing our final opening of our teens, finale and opening of an exhibition curated for and by teens. This year it's on Governor's Island. It's happening right now. But if you are in New York, please go to Governor's Island. There's a beautiful exhibition. The young people come up with the theme. This year it's body positivity, and this is the title they came up with. And the curators are teens, and it's up through July. And then this is just, if you want to be in touch, we can talk to me afterwards, but another opportunity to be in touch with me at some point later in the future. And thank you.
Wow. I am so inspired. Let's have another big round of applause. It's so amazing, the work that you're all doing. Thank you for sharing it this morning. And I want to be sure, I know the audience is going to have a lot of questions, but I want to just start with a little bit of a conversation amongst the three of you. And to start, I was so inspired, Stephanie, to hear you say that your time at Williams was a time when you had the chance to learn what you loved and what you're passionate about, also what you perhaps didn't love and didn't want to do, and how that continued to shape your career. Nothing more important than the power of the arts and the liberal arts. Thank you, Rachel, for highlighting that. That's so exciting. So at the Williams College Museum of Art, we're thinking very much about the future at the same time as we're trying to have impact in the present. We're coming up on our centennial in 2026, and we're planning for a new building, and it's all about opening doors and making spaces. We want to provide deep experiences for those who know they love the arts. We want to be very welcoming to people who might not otherwise think that the museum is a place for them. This makes me think of your comments, Mika. So I just wanted to start our conversation by asking all of you for a specific example, perhaps, of something from your Williams experience or your education more generally that set you on this incredibly impressive track that you're all on, where you're having such an impact in the arts. Mika, do you want to get us started? Or?
Sure. I mean, it's complicated. I chose the Williams graduate program because of its reputation. I was an art history major in college. My father is an artist, and he's sort of like the single most influential reason that I am doing that I chose this path. But I wanted to work in museums, and the graduate program has a fantastic reputation for training museum professionals. And it was just like all these doors would open for you, and they did. And so, that was just hugely important on setting me on my path. And of course, the friends I made and the networks, the people who've remained close to me, like came up in the last panel. But it's also complicated because, I was very privileged. We're all very privileged to have this opportunity, right, to go to Williams and to leverage that network and to have those doors be open for you. And now, sort of thinking about how do we not just expand access to Williams, but how do we now also open paths for people who didn't go to Williams, or for, to sort of think about the different kinds of experience and qualifications and competencies that we need. But I was, when I graduated from the Williams program, I wasn't really questioning that. I was just like, yes, I know this person who is going to help me get a job there, and that was great. But sort of now I'm that's sort of problematized for me.
I think for me, I always had great experiences in arts organizations. My parents took us to the High Museum in Atlanta every weekend, or it probably wasn't every weekend, but I think of it as every weekend. And I just had so many great memories, and I always felt really comfortable in museums. And so I think art history was a little bit more natural for me. I first took AP Art History in high school, and then I continued with Williams, and there was all of this talk of the Williams Mafia, and I had such great art history classes. Professor Achman is here. And so I don't think it was until I got to Williams where I realized, like, oh, this could be a career. I can just keep doing this. I didn't know what this was, but I realized I could continue. And at some point in my studies, I also realized, like, oh, I want this to be more accessible to, other people who don't feel as comfortable at arts organizations. And I think that came from external feedback. Like the way people would talk to me when I told them I work in the arts are like, oh, that's so like, people think of it as a very elitist thing. And to me, it's like, no, I mean, if you know any artists, that's not how they are. They're not making art for like this rarefied group of people. So my career and my desire is just to always make the arts more accessible and to build a bigger tent. And so I think that's why I've kind of taken the route I have had. One frustrating thing about the arts is there's not a particular path. So many of our classmates, who were in banking and law, they had like steps. They knew what they were doing year after year. And it often feels like we're in the Wild West trying to figure out a career path. And luckily it worked out for all of us. But I think in charting, navigating that path, it's like, okay, what's interesting and what organizations are making impact in terms of like opening doors?
I was lucky in the sense that my mom was an English teacher who was worried that I didn't read enough. And my father was very much an advocate for Black culture and African culture in the Caribbean. So when I was allowed, it was a British system of education, so it's a little bit different structure, very academically focused and competitive driven in terms of the. So I struggled in high school, and it was when I got to study in A-levels the arts and culture of Trinidad, and I chose to focus on women artists in Trinidad, that my mother noticed that my writing got better, that I wanted to read, that I was interested in, and I realized, oh, I'm actually smart, but I really struggled until that point. So I say that just because I was lucky in that sense. And when I came to Williams, I think what was valuable about my experience here, I struggled, initially when I first came here, but what was valuable is I learned that I could navigate my education. So I came here to be an art studio major, and I ended up being a contract major. I took a year off, and I had very strong support from Sandra Burton, who's sitting here, who made sure that I finished. Because I think what I struggled with was kind of like, how is my thinking being affected by being here? How do I process myself as an artist when I'm in a community that is so foreign from where I came from? But navigating that and then learning, I think also through Sandy and through kind of what my father represented was this concept of community, and how do you build community and how you make sure you're there for each other. She got me into the Urban Bush Women Summer Institute, and their company is all about how to be in community and use the arts in community. And so that's what I try to channel from what I learned here at Williams and through Sandy in the work that I do. So very valuable experience in the end to be at Williams. Yeah.
Wow. Wow, again, really, really inspiring. I want to be sure that we have plenty of time for questions, so start gathering your thoughts. I know there's a lot. The next sort of topic that I want to raise, which I'm sure will tie into many in the audience's questions, is where you see the work that you're doing now, the impact that you're having now, and how that leads to a future that you want to see for the arts and for engagement with the arts more broadly. So I don't know if any one of you want to sort of speak to that while the audience is gathering their thoughts, and then I'll start opening it up.
I could go. I think that what I am passionate about, and I think what is important for the world, is helping people learn to think. And I do think that the art, because we're in a place where people are just being herded into opinions and ideas without critically thinking, wait, what? And connecting the dots and kind of constructing their knowledge for themselves. And I really believe that the arts does that, and the arts education is a valuable component of that, and that it should be in everyone's education. So I think for me, the future is about advocating for that and trying to make sure as much as possible, year in and year out, that people get that. I mean, when you think about the pandemic and when things shut down, where did people go to? Community, even if it was via Zoom, and some sort of artistic experience. What is innately human in us, we keep trying to pound out. And we have to find a way to remind ourselves it's so important that the humanity and how we process who we are as humans comes through our artistic expression. So.
It's beautiful.
I'm really concerned and interested in there being more art everywhere. Those charts you showed were really astounding in terms of who is in the room and what are the voices who are developing what art we see. I will say that, I concentrate a lot on public art, and so going through an evaluation and we're seeing very exciting things that shows that people came together and art in cities helped increase people's well-being and made them feel better about their city and where they live. And most importantly, it brought people together. And I think just to build off of what you're saying, we are also so much in our own echo chambers, and we can choose which opinions we want to hear. And that is, antithetical to the Williams experience. We're all kind of thrown together in this entry, and you're being confronted with a lot of thoughts and opinions and people who you're like, that's how you think? What? And you have to socialize that and develop your own opinions and become an adult. And I'm concerned that the lack of arts and the lack of that critical thinking is going away, and we're seeing those repercussions in society. But also, I want people to know that the arts are have an actual real role, and it's not a dalliance. It's not something to the side. It's something that can be very much centered in your life, and it improves your life, and it forces you to think, and it makes people better, and it makes your experience of a city better. What do you do on the weekend? What do you do when you go on vacation? It's the arts that make the places where we live desirable places. And so my goal is to just always make arts and creativity more accessible to everyone.
I think for us and me at the National Gallery, we've got this existing collection, which we are trying to diversify and broaden the scope of, but it's really the core of the collection is one of our greatest treasures, and how do we make it accessible and relevant, and meaningful to everybody. That is what we have to do. And with museums, you can either sort of agitate for change from the outside, or you can take a job like mine on the inside, right? And you believe that there is something there to change, and that it is possible to change from within. But sometimes that belief is challenged. One statistic I did not show is that. This is 2017 data, but I haven't seen anything more recent, is that only about 24% of the American population went to a museum the year prior. 24%. So that's just not, yes to everything that you've said. Why don't people, how do we get this to be something that everybody wants to do, goes to regular, how can museums be solving something for people, be something that people need, and sort of change the way that we invest in the arts, change the way that we invest in museums, have them be more community-led, because something has to change, because we are supported by a very small slice of the population. We are sort of telling the stories of a very small slice of the population, and we need to just sort of, there needs to be some kind of sea change, that broadens the base of support and gets people more invested.
I'd also say that we have a responsibility to go where people are, all of us. There's in an institution where I was like, why aren't people coming? Why aren't people coming? Why aren't people coming seeing? We have to do so much to be better advocates for ourselves and do better marketing, do better community engagement. That's one thing that I really learned from our public art projects, just expecting people to come. You have to work with the people in the communities and the neighborhoods and let them know that this is a space for them as well. And I know institutions just have a hard time with that because you have an actual building,
Right.
and you have to keep the building open, so you have to charge admission.
We
so
don't, we're free.
Oh, you're free.
Thanks, all of you, we're free.
Which is incredible. But it's a difficult
Yeah.
difficult issue.
It is.
It is such a privilege for those institutions that we represent to be able to be free and open to the public at all times. And it's just the start, as you point out, Stephanie, and connecting and ensuring relevance, but also just the kind of way that you unlock the potential of our institutions and all of our creative productivity and practices to shape the experience and allow people to make their own meaning is critically important. And I think you're all speaking to that in such beautiful ways. I want to be sure we have a few minutes for some questions from the audience, and I know there are some, so please raise your hands. And I will, there are mics that will be, here we go, right here. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. A great panel, and thank you. I'm Beth Ann Flynn, class of '81. I think this is for Rachel and maybe Stephanie as well. Talking about the lower percentage of arts teachers in the lower income schools, I'm wondering how you think about connecting mental health and how art is a great outlet for mental health. And does that come into your grants? And just if that's a topic that's appropriate, if you could address it, please.
I mean, part of the way we work, we actually we train our artists, we work with artists annually to look at their teaching practice and the way that we teach. And we had artists say to us once, I am not a mental health professional. What do I do when it comes into the room? And the answer from the person who was helping to facilitate the conversation to think about that in their teaching it is in your room no matter what, even if it's not present. It doesn't manifest in some way. So you have to. Part of the artistic process is to let someone use the arts to help them process. So we work with artists to think about what that means when it does become present, but also to be aware that there's so much going on in your students' lives as you're working with them. The other thing we try to do, because it's the arts, is especially with the young people that we get to work with directly rather than through the school system, is to let them navigate what we're going to be talking about. So last year, the exhibition that I mentioned was around mental health. And the students brought it up, and we kind of, from that, go and find the professionals who can work with them to think about it from an artistic perspective, from a curatorial perspective, as they navigate the creation of that exhibition. And this year it was body positivity, again, another element that goes into your mental health. We had 12 artists who were part of an film called Anxious Nation that was on, that is kind of going around the country right now. It was just in New York, again, around the levels of anxiety that are growing in young people from that exhibition. So just allowing not stopping it when it comes, and allowing them to express. And I mean, they talk about wanting to be to get critical feedback that's actually helpful to them, in addition to an opportunity to just process their thoughts. And the arts allows for that. And we try to make sure we facilitate the support of that as best we can.
I agree. We now know there's an epidemic of loneliness. In our public art program, cities apply for a public art grant. So it's an interesting and excellent way to see what cities are concerned about. So going through the application process this year, a lot of cities are concerned about the mental health crisis. With the past project in Coral Springs and Parkland, we had an art therapist as one of our project partners, and there were art therapy workshops embedded into every single piece of that project. So people coming to volunteer to build, the temple or any of the other projects. The through line throughout that 2-year period of partnership was, this is a space where people can use the arts to get some mental reprieve and share their feelings. And with our evaluation, we're showing like an increase in well-being and connectivity. So I do want to be very careful because I think that's a lot to put on the arts. Can't cure everything, but it's part of, say, your toolkit. And certainly something that is like excellent to find out, and we all know that, but to have actual data that points to it is exciting. So I think just bringing people back together, we experienced an incredible 2 years. But having these spaces where people can come together and supporting the arts and in support of the arts is incredibly helpful and valuable.
Hello. Dorothy Lee, class of '89. This has to do with, I'm a resident of New York State, and I'm one of these like people who writes to our senators, and I'm like ringing people up and leaving voicemails. So I actually would like to know what we could do to, advocate for you and to get you all funding and to not have your budget cut at the National Gallery. If you don't mind, I apologize for like the narrowness of my question, but if you could just each say like, what would you like us to do to kind of give our politicians and people empower a poke? Thank you.
Well, right now, I was on the board of the New York City Arts and Education Roundtable, and New York State is one of the states that doesn't mandate the arts as a subject in schools. And so there's been a lot of rally on just trying to get it on the curriculum, right, where you mandate it. So there are guidelines for how many hours of arts should happen in schools, but nobody checks it and so you have to make it a mandate. That's like math and English. Young people need to have the arts. And if you go to the Roundtable's website, they have done stuff statewide, and they are rallying on, I believe it's June 22nd, but go to the Roundtable's website advocating for arts education in schools.
I would say Americans for the Arts has some data on, they rank candidates for national, state, and local, so you know which candidates actually care about the arts, but also just, since you're so civic-minded and engaged, like asking the question of candidates, because if that's not something people hear, they don't know that people care about it, and so bringing it up actively, because often, unfortunately, it's not brought up.
Yeah, like the League of Women Voters sometimes on those, they'll have like calls and I'm just thinking,
Yeah, and I would just add, keep being in touch with your congresspeople, about not just about the things you don't like, but the things you do like. And, we find at the National Gallery too, or a lot of the federally funded museums, it just takes one sort of angry constituent to write like, oh, I didn't like this, woke thing that happened, or, and then we'll hear about it. And but I don't know how many times they're getting letters, saying this is fantastic, yes, it's controversial, but it's important, and, we need to support, this sort of marketplace of ideas and different perspectives and all of that. So thank you.
Thanks for that question.
Hi, my name's Kathy Hart. I'm class of 77. Thank you very much. I admire the work you do and admire you very much. Thank you for sharing. The question I have sort of works off that same question. You all are activists of certain sorts within your own fields, moving things forward in your fields. And I was wondering how you think in this time of polarization, banned books, et cetera, how you think about what you do in terms of political activism. It's always a tricky thing to be in an arts organization where you want to be for everyone. So what do you think your agency or your role in terms of that type of work? Thank you.
I will just say, the short and easy answer for us at the National Gallery is like, there's federal, the Hatch Act prohibits us from really being political, so that's, we are bipartisan, we get bipartisan support, we just have to figure out how to navigate that, but there's other arts organizations can be more politically active.
Well, one of the things that because I was on the advocacy committee of the Roundtable, of the New York City Arts and Education Roundtable, and it's about issues. It's not necessarily about vote for this candidate, but it's about making issues visible and saying this is what we're struggling with. So that's the way we advocate for the field. Yeah. Nonprofits can't Yeah.
I work at a very political place. But I would say personally, I mean, out of great respect to activists, I would say I'm not an activist. I think that's like a full role and really incredible work that is needed. Yeah, banned books are a nightmare. I can't imagine, and like I'm very thankful to the people who are really in that fight. But I would also say that it can't just be the people at the front lines of those conversations who are trying to fight, make inroads. Like, we all have a role in that space. So we're able to do what we are doing in our careers and our organizations, but I think it's important for everyone in this room to, have those conversations and build a really big tent and looking fascism in the face.
I think we have time for one more question.
Hi, my name is Mary McTurnan.
Maybe two more.
Yeah, Mary McTurnan, class of '76, and I'm just so proud to be in this room with these amazing Williams women who are doing such wonderful work in the community. But my question is for Pam, because I was privileged to hear you speak earlier, maybe a year ago, about what WICMA is doing to make art more accessible for Williams students and across the curriculum. I was so impressed to hear something that was happening here now that was surely not happening back when I was here in the 70s. So to talk about that just a little bit, because I think other people would be, like me, surprised to hear all the ways you're making art more accessible for Williams students.
Thank you so much for that question. Yeah, well, in brief, because I could talk about this for days and days, we work with every discipline, every department across campus, and we work really hard to make the connections to the curriculum as deep and as relevant to the syllabus and what the students are studying and what the faculty members are trying to develop in the course of their teaching. So we have connections to the curriculum, and then we try to, at the same time, open up all kinds of avenues for student self-directed programming and creativity and listening. And I guess, what I would say the most important thing for us as a museum is that we have the opportunity to learn from the students that we work with. We had thousands of students, over 4,000 student visits in the context of courses, and many, 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 many more in the context of all of this extracurricular engagement. And it's all really sort of closely connected to the planning and the thinking that we're doing about what the museum offers and how we're planning for the future, so that we're learning from students every day. And that it's all sort of to the end of trying to stay relevant and be meaningful and provide a kind of platform for our communities to engage with the collection and with the programming, but also help co-create what the institution's going to be going forward. And there's no better place to do that than in a college setting, and especially at Williams, where the liberal arts connections are so strong. So the kind of dialogues on campus and the work that's happening every day for all of us is so primed for these connections to art, and the conversations that happen around art and in the spaces of the museum are, I think, deepening and broadening and offering surprises about what's possible to learn and really optimistic paths to the future. So thank you for that question. I wonder if any of you have any sort of other thoughts along those lines of the kinds of ways that institutions actually can help, can position themselves to evolve moving forward by partnering with constituents and listening very carefully and being responsive. We have a great privilege to be able to do that here at Williams in this particular community that values the arts so much. And I love the idea that it might be relevant or a model for what's possible in institutions more broadly.
I'm a huge fan of partnership. I think of that as the through line through my career. I think it's the only way to really get things done, both with government, private sector, other nonprofits. And two, actually, this also maybe answers the question earlier about how to better advocate and also like how do we get people to come. Partnerships in our programs have helped us be better and talk about the work we do and also help those that work be more successful. You know, building a big tent, bringing in residents, building another nonprofit so there's more ownership of the art. And I just think too, you know, our Camden project, this little city in New Jersey, which is probably one of the poorest cities in New Jersey, their art project was able to get them $55 million in funding. And like Tulsa was able to bring in over $20 million in capital funding through their project. And like these are things that an art project did. People think of the art as something that you donate to, and it's like, no, the arts are the reason why these cities are great, these places where we live are great, and I think it's important to center them in that way, and that this is an investment that will help everyone. And we saw those projects bring in $100 million in economic impact, and that's because of partnerships. So I think it's also the way we talk about things, like there's a lot of data and we want to talk about the qualitative impacts a lot, but I think it's also important to focus on the quantitative impacts, which grow multiple fold because of the partnerships that we undertake, and none of us can do this work alone.
Can I just add, because I think it's very important. Partnerships, yes, very important, but institutions have to think about, and it's why I said I want Arts Connection to move to more community, other models, right? Other models for how we run the institution, because you know, partnership means we're still kind of like these separate entities, and how does the institution evolve by actually being inclusive of folks that weren't there before, like, and to really analyze that. I mean, I'm sure that's part of what your job is at the National Museum, to really analyze that and to maybe shift the structure of how you lead and how you listen and who is at the table to be heard. Yeah.
And I would just say that the National Gallery does not have a great track record of partnership. We're still learning how to do it. So these are the folks you want to be modeling.
So I just want to say a huge thank you, Rachel, Stephanie, Mika, all of you.